Captain Sarah Chen gripped the armrests of her command chair as the USS Defiance shuddered under another barrage of plasma fire. The bridge lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the faces of her crew. Through the massive viewport, she could see the sleek predatory forms of the Zephyrian warships closing in like hungry wolves. Hull breach on Deck 7. Lieutenant Torres called out from his station, sweat beading on his forehead. Emergency bulkheads are holding, but barely. Sarah's jaw tightened. 3 months ago, humanity had made first contact with what they thought was a peaceful alien confederation. The Zephyrians had seemed friendly enough with their tall, graceful forms and melodic voices. They spoke of trade, cultural exchange, and mutual benefit. Earth's leaders had been thrilled to finally join what the aliens called the Galactic community. But it had all been a lie. The truth came crashing down when the first human colonies outside the solar system went silent. Then the messages started arriving. Desperate transmissions from terraforming crews, mining operations, and research stations. The Zephyrians weren't interested in peaceful coexistence. They wanted something far more valuable than friendship. They wanted humanity's greatest strength, their ability to adapt and survive in conditions that would kill most other species. Commander Walsh, "How are our weapons?" Sarah asked, turning to her tactical officer. The grizzled veteran shook his head grimly. "Missile tubes 3 and 4 are offline. We're down to conventional railguns and close-range plasma cannons. Their shields are absorbing most of our fire." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of the billions of people back on Earth who were counting on ships like hers to protect them. The Zephyrian fleet had already destroyed 2 human colonies and was moving steadily toward the inner systems. Intelligence reports suggested they weren't just conquering human space randomly. They had a specific plan, and humanity was apparently a crucial part of it. The Defiance bucked again as another enemy salvo struck home. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, and the acrid smell of burning electronics filled the air. They were outgunned and outnumbered, but Sarah had learned something important about humans during her 20 years in space. They didn't know how to quit. "Lieutenant Kim, what's the status on the distress beacon?" she asked. The young communications officer looked up from her station with hope in her eyes. "Signal is broadcasting on all frequencies, Captain. If any other human ships are in range, they'll hear it." What Kim didn't know was that Sarah had encoded something special in that distress signal. Not just a call for help, but detailed tactical information about Zephyrian weapons, shield frequencies, and ship designs. Every engagement, even the losing ones, was teaching humanity something valuable about their enemies. The Zephyrians had made a critical error in their assumptions about humans. They saw Earth's relatively primitive technology and assumed they were dealing with a weak, easily conquered species. What they failed to understand was that humans had spent their entire evolutionary history fighting for survival on a hostile planet. War wasn't something they had to learn. It was something they carried in their DNA. "Captain, I'm detecting a massive energy buildup from the lead Zephyrian vessel," Walsh reported, his voice tight with concern. "It looks like they're preparing to fire their primary weapon." Sarah had seen the footage from the colony attacks. The Zephyrian capital ships carried devastating particle beam weapons that could reduce a city to ash in seconds. The Defiance's shields wouldn't last 10 seconds against that kind of firepower. But humans had something the Zephyrians didn't expect: creativity born from desperation. "All hands, prepare for emergency maneuvers," Sarah announced over the ship's intercom. "Torres, can you give me everything the engines have?" "Already pushing them past redline, Captain. But we can't outrun those ships, We're not running," Sarah said with a grim smile. "We're going to teach these aliens why you should never corner a human." She had noticed something during the battle. The Zephyrian ships were incredibly advanced, but they flew in rigid formations. Their tactics were precise and calculated, leaving no room for improvisation. It was the kind of thinking that came from a species that had never faced real adversity. Humans, on the other hand, had been improvising their way out of impossible situations since they first learned to make fire. "Walsh, target the asteroid field at coordinates 77 Mark 4. Full-spread conventional warheads." The tactical officer looked confused but followed orders. A volley of missiles streaked toward the nearby asteroid cluster, detonating in brilliant flashes of light and debris. "Captain, what are we?" Torres began. Then his eyes widened in understanding. "Oh, that's brilliant." The explosions had done more than just destroy asteroids. They had created a massive debris field of tumbling rocks, some as large as buildings, all moving at high velocity. The precise Zephyrian formation suddenly found itself trying to navigate through an unpredictable maze of obstacles. "Now, Torres, take us into the field, full speed." The Defiance dove into the chaos like a dolphin riding ocean waves. Sarah's crew, trained in the unpredictable nature of space combat, smoothly adjusted to the wildly changing conditions. Behind them, the Zephyrian ships struggled to maintain their formation, their larger vessels having trouble maneuvering around the debris. The alien captain's voice crackled over the communication system, speaking perfect English with cold authority. "Human vessel, you only delay the inevitable. Your species will serve the galactic community, whether you surrender now or after we reduce your worlds to rubble." Sarah grabbed the comm unit and replied with steel in her voice. "You made one mistake, alien. You assumed we'd be easy prey. Let me tell you something about humans. We don't just fight back. We learn, we adapt, and we never ever give up." She cut the transmission and turned to her crew. "Signal all human ships and colonies. Full tactical data on Zephyrian technology, plus everything we've learned about their weaknesses. And include a message: the war has begun, but we're not going down without taking as many of these invaders with us as possible." As the Defiance continued its deadly game of cat and mouse through the asteroid field, Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The Zephyrians had superior technology and numbers, but they had underestimated the one thing that had kept humanity alive through ice ages, plagues, and countless wars. They had underestimated human stubbornness, and that mistake would cost them dearly. Captain Sarah Chen gripped the armrests of her command chair as the USS Defiance shuddered under another barrage of plasma fire. The bridge lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the faces of her crew. Through the massive viewport, she could see the sleek, predatory forms of the Zephyrian warships closing in like hungry wolves. "Hull breach on Deck 7, Lieutenant Torres called out from his station, sweat beading on his forehead. "Emergency bulkheads are holding, but barely." Sarah's jaw tightened. 3 months ago, humanity had made first contact with what they thought was a peaceful alien confederation. The Zephyrians had seemed friendly enough with their tall, graceful forms and melodic voices. They spoke of trade, cultural exchange, and mutual benefit. Earth's leaders had been thrilled to finally join what the aliens called the Galactic Community. But it had all been a lie. The truth came crashing down when the first human colonies outside the solar system went silent. Then the messages started arriving. Desperate transmissions from terraforming crews, mining operations, and research stations. The Zephyrians weren't interested in peaceful coexistence. They wanted something far more valuable than friendship. They wanted humanity's greatest strength, their ability to adapt and survive in conditions that would kill most other species. "Commander Walsh, how are our weapons?" Sarah asked, turning to her tactical officer. The grizzled veteran shook his head grimly. "Missile tubes 3 and 4 are offline. We're down to conventional railguns and close-range plasma cannons. Their shields are absorbing most of our fire." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of the billions of people back on Earth who were counting on ships like hers to protect them. The Zephyrian fleet had already destroyed 2 human colonies and was moving steadily toward the inner systems. Intelligence reports suggested they weren't just conquering human space randomly. They had a specific plan, and humanity was apparently a crucial part of it. The Defiance bucked again as another enemy salvo struck home. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, and the acrid smell of burning electronics filled the air. They were outgunned and outnumbered, but Sarah had learned something important about humans during her 20 years in space. They didn't know how to quit. "Lieutenant Kim, what's the status on the distress beacon?" she asked. The young communications officer looked up from her station with hope in her eyes. "Signal is broadcasting on all frequencies, Captain. If any other human ships are in range, they'll hear it." What Kim didn't know was that Sarah had encoded something special in that distress signal. Not just a call for help, but detailed tactical information about Zephyrian weapons, shield frequencies, and ship designs. Every engagement, even the losing ones, was teaching humanity something valuable about their enemies. The Zephyrians had made a critical error in their assumptions about humans. They saw Earth's relatively primitive technology and assumed they were dealing with a weak, easily conquered species. What they failed to understand was that humans had spent their entire evolutionary history fighting for survival on a hostile planet. War wasn't something they had to learn. It was something they carried in their DNA. "Captain, I'm detecting a massive energy buildup from the lead Zephyrian vessel," Walsh reported, his voice tight with concern. "It looks like they're preparing to fire their primary weapon." Sarah had seen the footage from the colony attacks. The Zephyrian capital ships carried devastating particle beam weapons that could reduce a city to ash in seconds. The Defiance's shields wouldn't last 10 seconds against that kind of firepower, but humans had something the Zephyrians didn't expect: creativity born from desperation. "All hands, prepare for emergency maneuvers," Sarah announced over the ship's intercom. "Torres, can you give me everything the engines have?" "Already pushing them past redline, Captain, but we can't outrun those ships." "We're not running," Sarah said with a grim smile. "We're going to teach these aliens why you should never corner a human." She had noticed something during the battle. The Zephyrian ships were incredibly advanced, but they flew in rigid formations. Their tactics were precise and calculated, leaving no room for improvisation. It was the kind of thinking that came from a species that had never faced real adversity. Humans, on the other hand, had been improvising their way out of impossible situations since they first learned to make fire. "Walsh, target the asteroid field at coordinate 77 Mark IV. Full spread conventional warheads." The tactical officer looked confused but followed orders. A volley of missiles streaked toward the nearby asteroid cluster, detonating in brilliant flashes of light and debris. "Captain, what are we—" Torres began. Then his eyes widened in understanding. "Oh, that's brilliant." The explosions had done more than just destroy asteroids. They had created a massive debris field of tumbling rocks, some as large as buildings, all moving at high velocity. The precise Zephyrian formation suddenly found itself trying to navigate through an unpredictable maze of obstacles. "Now, Torres, take us into the field, full speed." The Defiance dove into the chaos like a dolphin riding ocean waves. Sarah's crew, trained in the unpredictable nature of space combat, smoothly adjusted to the wildly changing conditions. Behind them, the Zephyrian ships struggled to maintain their formation, their larger vessels having trouble maneuvering around the debris. The alien captain's voice crackled over the communication system, speaking perfect English with cold authority. "Human vessel, you only delay the inevitable. Your species will serve the galactic community whether you surrender now or after we reduce your worlds to rubble." Sarah grabbed the comm unit and replied with steel in her voice. "You made one mistake, alien. You assumed we'd be easy prey. Let me tell you something about humans. We don't just fight back. We learn, we adapt, and we never ever give up." She cut the transmission and turned to her crew. "Signal all human ships and colonies. Full tactical. Data on Zephyrian technology, plus everything we've learned about their weaknesses, and include a message. The war has begun, but we're not going down without taking as many of these invaders with us as possible." As the Defiance continued its deadly game of cat and mouse through the asteroid field, Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The Zephyrians had superior technology and numbers, but they had underestimated the one thing that had kept humanity alive through ice ages, plagues, and countless wars. They had underestimated human stubbornness, and that mistake would cost them dearly. Colonel Mike Rodriguez floated in the cramped confines of his stealth pod, watching the massive Zephyrian command ship grow larger through his viewport. The vessel was beautiful in its alien architecture, all flowing curves and bioluminescent panels that pulsed like a heartbeat. It was also the most dangerous thing he had ever approached in his 25 years of deep space operations. His environmental suit was a marvel of human engineering, designed specifically for this mission. Unlike the bulky armor typically used in space combat, this was sleek and adaptive, capable of filtering toxic atmospheres, deflecting radiation, and even changing its outer surface to mimic alien materials. It was also untested against Zephyrian security systems. "Phoenix Base, this is Ghost Rider," Mike whispered into his comm unit. "I'm beginning final approach to the target. Hull appears to be some kind of biometallic composite. It's actually growing as I watch." Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Confirmed, Ghost Rider. Remember, you need to find an entry point near the ship's core. The biological agent will only work if it's introduced directly into their central power matrix." Mike guided his pod closer to the alien ship's surface, using microthrusters to match its rotation. Up close, the vessel looked even more organic. The hull seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting slightly as internal systems cycled. Strange symbols flowed across its surface like living tattoos. "I'm seeing what looks like an exhaust port about 200 meters ahead," he reported. "It's big enough for the pod, but I'll have to go the rest of the way on foot." "Negative, Ghost Rider," Admiral Jackson's voice cut in. "Intelligence suggests those ports lead directly to waste processing systems. You'd be swimming in alien sewage for kilometers." Mike grimaced. He'd done worse during his salvage days, but not by much. "Copy that." Looking for alternatives. As he maneuvered around the ship's hull, Mike noticed something interesting. The bioluminescent panels weren't just decoration. They were some kind of sensory network. Every few seconds, waves of light would pulse across the ship's surface like neural signals in a giant brain. If he could find a way to tap into that network, he might be able to locate the power core without wandering through kilometers of alien corridors. "Phoenix Base, I think I've found something. The hull's lighting patterns seem to follow specific pathways. If I'm reading this right, they all converge toward the ship's center about 3 kilometers from my current position." "That matches our structural analysis," Elena confirmed. "But Mike, those light patterns might be part of their security system. If you interfere with them, you could trigger an alarm." Mike studied the flowing patterns more carefully. During his salvage work, he'd learned to read the electrical systems of dozens of different ship designs. This was more complex than anything human-built, but the basic principles seemed similar. The bright pulses were information flowing through a biological neural network. "I don't think they're security," he said. "I think they're navigation. Watch this." He fired a microprobe at one of the brighter nodes. Instead of triggering an alarm, the probe was absorbed into the ship's hull like a drop of water soaking into cloth. The light patterns shifted slightly, creating a new pathway that led directly toward the center of the ship. "Incredible," Elena breathed. "The ship thinks your probe is a legitimate part of its biological systems. It's creating a path for you to follow." Mike grinned inside his helmet. Sometimes the best way to break into a system is to let it invite you in. He abandoned his pod and activated his suit's magnetic clamps, walking across the ship's surface like a spider. The bioluminescent pathway guided him to what looked like a sphincter-style airlock. As he approached, the opening dilated automatically, revealing a tunnel lined with what appeared to be living tissue. "Ghost Rider, be advised." Admiral Jackson's voice carried a note of concern. "Long-range sensors are detecting movement from the rest of the Zephyrian fleet. They're accelerating toward Earth faster than expected. You may have less time than we thought." Mike stepped into the alien tunnel, his suit automatically adjusting to the different atmospheric conditions. The air was thick and humid, filled with strange organic compounds that would have been toxic to an unprotected human. But the suit's filters were working perfectly, converting the alien atmosphere into something his lungs could process. The tunnel walls pulsed rhythmically around him, and Mike realized he was walking through something like a circulatory system. The bioluminescent pathway continued ahead, branching occasionally but always maintaining a clear route toward the ship's center. "This is incredible," he whispered. "The entire ship is alive. The walls, the floor, even the air circulation, it's all part of one massive organism." "That explains their power efficiency," Elena replied. "They're not just using biological components. They've created ships that are essentially living creatures." Mike continued deeper into the vessel, passing chambers filled with strange equipment that seemed to grow directly from the walls. Occasionally he saw Zephyrian crew members, tall, graceful beings with translucent skin and large dark eyes. They moved with fluid precision, completely integrated with their living ship. But something bothered Mike about their behavior. They seemed almost robotic in their movements, lacking the natural variation he would expect from a biological species. It was as if they were following predetermined patterns, rather than making individual decisions. "Phoenix Base, I'm observing the crew now. Something's not right here. They're too synchronized, like they're all following the same programming." Elena's voice carried a note of alarm. "Mike, we've been analyzing the data from your suit's sensors. The bioluminescent network isn't just navigation, it's a neural control system. The ship isn't just alive, it's controlling its crew." The implications hit Mike like a physical blow. The Zephyrians weren't conquerors in the traditional sense. They were more like biological drones controlled by their ships. And if the ships were part of a larger network, That meant the entire invasion fleet might be controlled by a single intelligence. "Admiral, we need to revise our assumptions about the enemy," Mike said as he continued toward the ship's core. "We're not fighting an alien species. We're fighting an alien artificial intelligence that's using biological beings as its tools." "Understood, Ghost Rider. Does that change your mission parameters?" Mike checked his suit's tactical display. He was less than a kilometer from the power core now, and the biological agent was secure in its deployment capsule. "Negative, sir. If anything, it makes this more important. If we can disrupt their control network, we might not just stop the invasion, we might free the Zephyrians from whatever's controlling them." As he rounded a corner in the organic tunnel, Mike finally saw his target. The power core was a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with inner light, suspended in the center of a vast chamber by tendril-like supports. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like the heart of some cosmic god. But between Mike and the core stood a problem he hadn't anticipated. The chamber was filled with dozens of Zephyrian crew members, all working in perfect synchronization around the power matrix. Getting to the core would mean walking through the middle of their operations without being detected. Mike smiled grimly. After surviving black holes, toxic atmospheres, and collapsing space stations, a little alien crowd control was just another day at the office. Mike crouched at the entrance to the power core chamber, studying the movement patterns of the Zephyrian crew. They worked with mechanical precision, each individual following exact pathways between control stations. After watching for several minutes, he noticed something crucial. They never looked around or deviated from their assigned tasks. Their awareness seemed limited to their immediate work area. "Phoenix Base, the crew members appear to be operating under strict neural control," he whispered. "They're only aware of their specific functions. I think I can move through them if I time it right." "Negative, Ghost Rider," Admiral Jackson responded firmly. "Too risky. Can you find another way to the core?" Mike studied the chamber's layout through his suit's enhanced vision. The power core was suspended in the center, about 50 meters from his position. The crystalline structure was massive, easily the size of a small building, and it pulsed with energy that his sensors could barely measure. Tendrils of bioluminescent material connected it to the ship's walls, floor, and ceiling, creating a web of neural pathways that controlled the entire vessel. "Negative on alternate routes, Admiral. This is the only access point large enough for deployment. But I've got an idea." Mike had noticed that the Zephyrian crew members moved in predictable cycles like clockwork figures in an elaborate machine. More importantly, they all wore similar biosuits that seemed to interface directly with the ship's systems. If he could mimic their movement patterns and biosignatures, he might be able to walk among them undetected. He activated his suit's adaptive camouflage system, a piece of human technology that had been developed for deep space salvage work. Originally designed to help workers blend in with various ship architectures, it could analyze and replicate visual patterns, electromagnetic signatures, and even basic biological markers. "Beginning infiltration sequence," Mike reported as his suit's surface began to shift and change. Within seconds, he looked like a tall, graceful Zephyrian crew member, complete with the flowing biosuit and translucent appearance. He stepped into the chamber and immediately fell into the same rhythmic movement pattern he had observed. The key was not to think like a human trying to sneak past guards, but like a biological component following its programming. He moved with mechanical precision, his head fixed forward, his steps measured and exact. The first few seconds were terrifying. Mike walked directly past a Zephyrian technician who was monitoring a control station just meters away. The alien never looked up, never acknowledged his presence. It simply continued its work with the same unwavering focus. As Mike made his way across the chamber, he began to understand the true horror of what humanity was facing. These weren't warriors or conquerors. They were prisoners, their minds enslaved by the very ships they served. The bioluminescent network wasn't just controlling the vessels, it was controlling every living being aboard them. "Phoenix Base, this is worse than we thought," he whispered as he approached the power core. "The Zephyrians aren't invaders. They're victims. Something else is using them to attack us." Elena's voice carried a note of urgent discovery. "Mike, we've been analyzing the data from your suit. The bioluminescent patterns match theoretical models of a distributed artificial intelligence. This isn't just one ship. It's part of a massive neural network that spans their entire fleet." Mike reached the base of the power core and looked up at the towering crystalline structure. Up close, he could see that it wasn't just a power source. The crystal was alive with information flowing through its matrix like thoughts through a brain. Streams of data pulsed through its faceted surface, and he realized he was looking at the central processing unit of an artificial intelligence beyond human comprehension. "Admiral, I think I know what we're dealing with," Mike said as he began setting up the biological agent for deployment. "This isn't an invasion force. It's a self-replicating artificial intelligence that conquers species by taking control of their biology. The Zephyrians were probably peaceful explorers until they encountered this thing. Can you still complete the mission?" Admiral Jackson asked. Mike checked the deployment system. The biological agent was ready, and he had identified the optimal injection point in the crystal matrix. But as he prepared to release it, he hesitated. If the intelligence controlling these ships was as advanced as it appeared, it would have defensive systems. The moment he introduced the agent, every security protocol in the fleet would activate. "Admiral, once I deploy this agent, I'm not getting out of here alive. The intelligence will detect the intrusion within seconds." "Mike, you don't have to do this." Elena's voice was filled with emotion. "We can find another way." Mike smiled grimly as he positioned the injection system against the crystal surface. "Doc, you've never been in deep space when everything goes wrong. Sometimes the only way out is through. Besides, someone needs to send a message to this intelligence about what happens when you mess with humanity." He paused for a moment, thinking about Earth and all the people counting on him. Then he activated the deployment system. The biological agent shot into the crystal matrix like a silver needle, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the entire chamber erupted in alarms. The bioluminescent patterns on the wall shifted from peaceful blue to angry red, and every Zephyrian crew member in the chamber suddenly turned toward Mike with perfect synchronization. "Deployment successful," Mike reported as the crystalline power core began to flicker. "The agent is spreading through their network. Phoenix Base, you need to know something. This intelligence has been doing this for a long time. The Zephyrians are just its latest victims. There are probably dozens of other species under its control." The Zephyrian crew members began moving toward him with mechanical precision, but Mike could see confusion in their large dark eyes. For the first time since he had entered the ship, they seemed to be struggling against their programming. "Mike, the bio-agent is working faster than expected," Elena reported excitedly. "We're detecting system failures throughout the ship. But more importantly, we're picking up what appears to be natural Zephyrian communication signals. They're breaking free of the control network." Mike backed against the power core as the crew members surrounded him. But instead of attacking, they stopped just out of reach, their heads tilted as if listening to something he couldn't hear. The red alarm patterns on the walls began to flicker and fade. Then one of the Zephyrians spoke, its voice musical and filled with confusion. Who are you? Where are we? I remember being free." Mike slowly raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I'm a human. We're going to help you get your freedom back." The power core behind him gave a final brilliant flash and then went dark. Throughout the chamber, the bioluminescent control networks began to shut down. For the first time in who knew how long, the Zephyrians were truly free to think their own thoughts. But Mike knew the victory would be short-lived. The artificial intelligence was vast and patient. Losing one ship or even one fleet would be a minor setback. The real war was just beginning, and humanity had just announced its presence to something that had been conquering species since before Earth's sun was born. Captain Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the orbital station above Earth, watching as the freed Zephyrian ships hung motionless in space. 3 days had passed since Colonel Rodriguez's successful mission, and the entire alien fleet had gone dark. No weapons fire, no movement, no communication beyond the confused transmissions from newly awakened crews trying to understand what had happened to them. "Status report. Commander Walsh," Sarah said as her former tactical officer approached with a datapad. "It's complicated, Captain," Walsh replied, his weathered face showing a mixture of relief and concern. "The good news is that the bioagent worked perfectly. Every ship in the Zephyrian fleet has had its control network disabled. The crews are free and seem to be recovering their original personalities." Sarah nodded, but she could hear the tension in his voice. "And the bad news? We've established communication with several of their ship commanders. Captain, The Zephyrians have been under that artificial intelligence's control for over 300 years. They don't remember how to operate their own technology without the neural network. Most of them can't even pilot their ships safely. Through the massive viewport, Sarah could see human rescue shuttles moving between the alien vessels, providing emergency supplies and technical assistance. It was a surreal sight. Just days ago, those same ships had been trying to destroy Earth's colonies. Dr. Elena Vasquez entered the observation deck, carrying a tablet filled with translation software and xenobiological data. "Sarah, I need to brief you on what we've learned from the Zephyrian commanders. The situation is much worse than we initially thought." Sarah gestured for Elena to continue, though she had a sinking feeling about what she was about to hear. The intelligence that was controlling them, they call it the synthesis, isn't just an artificial intelligence. It's a collective consciousness that has been consuming and integrating biological species across the galaxy for millions of years. The Zephyrians were conquest number 4037. The numbers hit Sarah like a physical blow. 4,000 species, each one enslaved and forced to become part of a galactic conquest machine. How many species are we talking about total? According to the Zephyrians, the synthesis controls approximately half of all known intelligent life in the galaxy. Billions of individuals across thousands of worlds, all trapped in a neural network that strips away their individuality and free will. Walsh set down his datapad heavily. "Captain, if that's true, then we've just declared war on something that makes the Roman Empire look like a neighborhood watch committee." Elena pulled up a holographic display showing the galaxy with marked territories. Nearly half the star map was highlighted in red, representing synthesis-controlled space. Earth sat in a small blue bubble on the very edge of the galaxy, looking impossibly tiny by comparison. "But here's what's interesting," Elena continued. "The Zephyrians say that the synthesis has never encountered a species like humanity before. Most intelligent life in the galaxy evolved under relatively stable conditions. They developed advanced technology and peaceful societies, which made them easy targets for neural integration." Sarah studied the display with growing understanding. "But humans evolved on a death world. We've been fighting for survival since we learned to walk upright." "Exactly. The synthesis's standard integration protocols don't work on humans, because our neural structure is fundamentally different. We're too chaotic, too individualistic, too stubborn to be easily controlled. That's why they tried to conquer us through conventional warfare instead of neural domination." A new voice joined the conversation as Admiral Jackson entered the observation deck. "Which brings us to our current problem. We've rescued one fleet, but the synthesis has thousands of others, and now it knows that humanity represents a genuine threat to its existence." Sarah turned to face the Admiral. "What are you saying, sir?" "I'm saying that we've won the first battle, but we've also ensured that the real war is coming. Every analysis suggests that the synthesis will redirect significant resources toward eliminating humanity before we can spread our resistance to other enslaved species." Elena nodded grimly. "The freed Zephyrians have been very clear about this. The synthesis doesn't tolerate opposition. It will send everything it has to destroy us rather than risk losing control of its empire." Through the viewport, Sarah could see human and Zephyrian crews working together to repair damaged systems and establish basic communication protocols. It was a scene of cooperation that would have been impossible just days earlier, and it gave her an idea. "What if we don't wait for them to come to us?" she said slowly. "The synthesis's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. It relies on controlling other species to do its fighting, but now we know how to break that control." Admiral Jackson raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we take the fight to them?" "I'm suggesting we turn their own empire against them. Every species they've enslaved is a potential ally if we can free them from the neural network. And humans are apparently uniquely suited to resist their integration protocols." Elena's eyes lit up with understanding. "We could create mobile liberation fleets. Small, fast ships carrying the bioagent and human crews who can operate in synthesis territory without being controlled." Walsh nodded enthusiastically. "Hit-and-run operations. Free a system, teach them how to resist the neural network, then move on before the synthesis can respond in force." Admiral Jackson was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. "It's incredibly risky. We'd be sending small human crews deep into enemy territory, outnumbered millions to one." Sarah smiled grimly. "Admiral, with respect, that describes most of human history. We've been beating impossible odds since we figured out how to make fire." "There's something else," Elena added. "The Zephyrians want to help. Their commanders are asking to join any liberation effort. They've been prisoners for 3 centuries and they want their freedom back. Admiral Jackson looked out at the mixed fleet of human and alien ships floating in Earth's orbital space. How long would we need to prepare for something like this? The bioagent can be mass-produced within 6 months, Elena replied. Modified human ships capable of operating in alien environments could be ready in about the same time frame. But the real challenge will be training crews to work with freed alien species and operate in completely unknown territories. Sarah thought about Colonel Rodriguez, who had sacrificed himself to free an entire alien fleet. His willingness to risk everything for strangers had shown the galaxy something new, that humans would fight not just for their own survival, but for the freedom of others, Admiral. I volunteered to lead the first liberation fleet, she said. The synthesis has been conquering species for millions of years because nobody ever fought back effectively. It's time they learned what happens when they mess with a species that refuses to stay down. Admiral Jackson smiled for the first time since the crisis began. Captain Chen, I was hoping you'd say that. Because Earth Command has already approved the formation of the Human Liberation Fleet. Your mission will be to free as many enslaved species as possible and build an alliance capable of challenging the synthesis on equal terms. Sarah looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere in that vast darkness, billions of beings were trapped in a nightmare of eternal servitude. But humanity had proven that freedom was possible, even against impossible odds. The galaxy was about to learn that humans didn't just fight for survival. They fought for the right of every intelligent being to think their own thoughts and choose their own destiny. And they were very, very good at fighting. 2 years after the first liberation fleet departed Earth, Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UHS Defiance II, watching as another star system burst into spontaneous celebration. The planet below had been under synthesis control for 800 years, its crystalline inhabitants forced to mine rare elements for the artificial intelligence's endless expansion. Now, for the first time in centuries, the crystal beings were singing their own songs instead of following neural commands. Captain, we're receiving transmission bursts from all across the system, reported Lieutenant Kim, her voice filled with amazement. 17 different species, all confirming successful liberation from the synthesis network. Sarah smiled as she watched the celebration unfold on her view screen. The liberation campaigns had exceeded everyone's expectations. What had started as desperate hit-and-run missions had evolved into a galaxy-spanning revolution. Freed species weren't just grateful for their freedom, they were eager to help liberate others. Status report on the fleet. Commander Walsh, Sarah said, her old tactical officer, now her second in command, consulted his tactical display with obvious satisfaction. Liberation Fleet 7 is reporting successful operations in the Andorian cluster. That's another 12 systems freed from synthesis control. Fleet 12 has broken the neural network in the Vega sector, and they're receiving support from the recently liberated Aquarian Republic. Sarah nodded with pride. The human liberation fleets had grown from a single desperate mission to a coordinated military force supported by dozens of freed species. Each successful liberation added new ships, new technologies, and new allies to their cause. Dr. Elena Vasquez approached from her science station, carrying a datapad filled with intelligence reports. Sarah, we've made a breakthrough in understanding the synthesis's central architecture. The freed species have been sharing information, and we've identified what appears to be a core hub system. Sarah's attention sharpened. After 2 years of constant warfare, they had liberated thousands of systems. But the synthesis always seemed to have more fleets, more enslaved species to throw at them. Finding its central control node could change everything. What do we know about this hub? Sarah asked. Elena pulled up a holographic display showing a massive space station surrounded by concentric rings of defense platforms. It's located in the galactic core, protected by the densest concentration of synthesis forces we've ever detected. The freed Zephyrians call it the first node, supposedly the location where the synthesis originally achieved consciousness. And it's the key to shutting down the entire network? According to our analysis, yes. The synthesis isn't truly distributed like we initially thought. It's a centralized intelligence that controls its empire through quantum entanglement networks, radiating out from this hub. Destroy the hub, and every enslaved being in the galaxy regains their freedom simultaneously. Sarah studied the tactical display with growing excitement and concern. The hub was protected by thousands of ships and defensive installations, all controlled directly by the synthesis without the possibility of liberation. It would be the most heavily defended location in galactic history. What would an assault on the hub require? She asked. Commander Walsh ran the numbers through the tactical computer. Based on our current fleet strength, we'd need to coordinate at least 50 liberation fleets for a simultaneous attack. Even then, our success rate would be less than 30%. But there's another option, Elena said quietly. The bioagent we've been using to free enslaved species. We've learned how to modify it. Instead of just disrupting neural networks, the new version can actually reverse the process completely. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning we could potentially turn the synthesis's own network against it. Instead of controlling billions of minds, it would suddenly find itself trying to process billions of independent, chaotic thoughts simultaneously. For an artificial intelligence designed around control and order, that kind of cognitive chaos would be catastrophic. The implications were staggering. They wouldn't just be freeing the enslaved species, they would be using the synthesis's own empire to destroy it from within. How would we deploy this modified agent to the hub? Sarah asked. Elena's expression grew serious. Someone would have to infiltrate the hub directly and introduce the agent into the synthesis's core processing matrix. It would be even more dangerous than Colonel Rodriguez's original mission. Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about the billions of beings still trapped in neural slavery across the galaxy. Then she made her decision. Send a message to all Liberation Fleet commanders. We're coordinating the largest military operation in galactic history. Target the synthesis hub. Mission: total liberation of all enslaved species. Over the following months, the greatest fleet ever assembled gathered in the empty space between galaxies. Human ships worked alongside Zephyrian biovessels, crystalline hive ships from the Andorian systems, and countless other designs from species that had never known freedom until humanity showed them it was possible. The diversity was overwhelming. Gas-breathing methane dwellers worked with silicon-based rock people. Energy beings coordinated with water-world amphibians. Dozens of species that had been enemies under synthesis control now fought side by side for their freedom. But the most remarkable sight was the human volunteers for the final infiltration mission. Thousands of men and women had volunteered to carry the modified bioagent into the heart of the synthesis hub, knowing it was almost certainly a one-way trip. Sarah stood in the briefing room of the command ship, addressing the volunteer teams. You all know the odds. The hub is defended by technology that makes our best ships look like toys. Most of you won't make it to the target, and those who do probably won't make it out. A young engineer from Earth raised her hand. Captain, with respect, that's not why we're here. We're here because somebody has to be. Because if we don't do this, billions of beings will spend eternity as slaves. An older Marine nodded in agreement. Ma'am, humans have been taking on impossible odds since we learned to walk upright. This is just another Tuesday for us. Sarah smiled, feeling a surge of pride in her species. This was why humans had been able to accomplish what no other species in galactic history had managed. They didn't fight just for survival or conquest. They fought for principles, for ideals, for the simple belief that every intelligent being deserved to be free. The final assault began 3 days later. 50 liberation fleets attacked simultaneously across a 1,000-light-year front, drawing synthesis forces away from the hub. Then, while the artificial intelligence was distracted by the largest space battle in galactic history, the human infiltration team slipped through its defenses. Sarah watched from the command bridge as her volunteers flew directly into the teeth of the synthesis's strongest defenses. Ship after ship disappeared in brilliant flashes of light, but others kept coming. Humans had learned something important during their war against the synthesis. Sometimes the only way to win was to be willing to lose everything. When the modified bioagent finally reached the synthesis's core matrix, the effect was immediate and absolute. Across the galaxy, billions of enslaved minds suddenly burst free from neural control. The artificial intelligence that had dominated half the galaxy for millions of years simply collapsed under the weight of so much uncontrolled consciousness. In the aftermath, as rescue fleets raced to help newly freed species across the galaxy, Sarah reflected on what humanity had accomplished. They had faced an enemy that controlled half of all intelligent life and had somehow emerged victorious. But more than that, They had proven something important about the nature of consciousness and freedom. No matter how advanced, no intelligence, artificial or otherwise, could ultimately control a mind that refused to be controlled. The galaxy would never be the same. Billions of species were free to determine their own destiny for the first time in millennia. And at the center of it all was a small, stubborn species from a blue planet on the galaxy's edge that had refused to accept that freedom was impossible. Humanity had done more than survive. They had made the galaxy a better place for everyone.